What's up, guys? Welcome back to Newswave. So as we head through Nintendo's current fiscal year, one thing is certain, they're going to be quizzed more and more about what's next after the Switch. And in fact, investors asked a bit, and it appears that Nintendo's president did respond with some interesting answers. We'll go over that, though, here today. Also, we are going to be talking about a strange situation that's currently unfolding with Sony and one of their partnered studios who just saw a massive number of layoffs happen. And we're also going to be talking about some first sales data for The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom, because turns out this game is actually going to sell well. Guys, if you enjoy these videos, make sure you hit that like button, helps out a ton. And if new here to the Spawnwave channel, make sure you subscribe down below. And we're going to start today with DBrand and a very familiar looking design for a new product that they've introduced, which you can see over there on their website, called Clone of the Kingdom. Now, DBrand in general, their marketing, they obviously are very tongue-in-cheek, like to kind of joke around a bit, but yeah, they've essentially recreated Nintendo's special edition Zelda system just in decal form, and they've changed up enough, I would assume, that it's not prone to any kind of copyright issues with Nintendo, and they kind of go in with that a bit more in the description, things like the power of plagiarism. They also have it for the Steam Deck. The wisdom of dead scientists. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. Obviously, a lot of parody and them kind of joking around. And Clone of the Kingdom, the entire set here that's for your Joy-Cons, the Switch, dock, all this, that's going for $49.95. So you can check that out over on their website. I guess, hey, if you already have a Switch, but you want that design, and you don't necessarily mind kind of the sort of like a matte feeling from the decals, they're available, and you can dress up your Switch to look similar enough without getting in trouble to the Zelda or Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom edition system. Also, it appears that Hogwarts Legacy for the Switch is actually not coming out in July. It's been pushed even further. This was posted up by their Twitter account that got a lot of people talking, and we'll go over why that is. But they say, Hogwarts Legacy launches on Nintendo Switch on November 14th, 2023. We know fans are looking forward to playing on Switch, therefore creating the best possible experience is our top priority. Thank you for your patience. It is now also available on the PS4 and Xbox One, which, by the way, it performs pretty well there. So that seemed to surprise some people, but so far so good, at least for Hogwarts Legacy across the board, and that appears to be what they want to happen with the Switch version. They don't want it to come out and be buggy or have performance issues. Seems like they just want to take more time with it, and at this point the game is selling incredibly well for them, so they probably don't feel the need to rush out and get the Switch version out there like now. The other thing that obviously has been brought up here is, are they delaying to kind of align it with maybe a release of a next generation platform for Nintendo? I don't think so. I think 2023 is kind of off the table at this point, and really it's just what they're saying. They want more time to develop and create a higher quality product for the Switch. And again, with what we've gone through recently in game releases, take all the time you need for it. Oh, and as people, of course, are playing through The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom, there are also speedrunners who are playing through it very, very quickly, faster than it took me to get done the first tutorial area, which we can see this posted up over on DualShockers, who says, just a few hours after the official launch of Tears of the Kingdom, well-known Zelda speedrunner Carl, or Gymnast86, successfully completed the game in 1 hour, 34 minutes, and 33 seconds. And you can watch the entire run over on YouTube. Obviously, there are spoilers in the game since they beat the entire thing in about an hour and a half, which again is kind of mind-blowing stuff. I mean, speedrunners in general, when they run through it and they do it very successfully in that kind of time, it's impressive just to see. But Tears of the Kingdom, for how lost I continue to get in this title, and I'm halfway through one of the major dungeons is what I'll say, and I just keep finding different things to do away from that main quest, and they're beating it in, again, an hour and a half, which is about 30 minutes less than it took me to completely jump off of the initial Sky Island and find my way to Hyrule. And guys, with some of the quick news out of the way, let's get into the bigger stuff. Let's start right away with Nintendo and plans for next generation. I mentioned that they were going to be quizzed about this and pressed a bit by their investors because they see a lot of money in the launch of a follow-up to a very successful system with the Switch. And there were some questions flying around, and I think we're going to see more questions asked next month at their annual gathering of the shareholders. However, we can see this being translated by VGC with Mr. Furukawa answering questions around some of their strategies and maybe even kind of the launch from initial announcement and the marketing build up there. This posted up over on VGC, answering the question around the idea of there being a 2-year period between announcement and release, similar to what happened with the Switch, because remember, it was first revealed as the NX like 2 years before it came out. But he said this announcement coincided with our partnership with DNA for the development of games for smartphones and support for the new Nintendo account system. At that time, as we were venturing into the mobile business, we felt it was important to reassure our audience that Nintendo's primary focus remained on our dedicated game console business. This is why the timing of the Nintendo Switch announcement was a unique situation. I mean, we saw how the Wii U was doing, which wasn't very good, and then they start talking about moving games over to mobile devices, and people were legitimately concerned that they were going to exit the console space. So they wanted to at least announce, hey, we are working on another system. Say, moving forward, our strategy is to disclose information about our products, including both hardware and software, at the most suitable times to reach our broad customer base. So this time, we may not have that 2-year window from announcement to release. In fact, I would think it'd be closer to 7 or 8 months, because you still want time for marketing and build up and producing the units, because once it goes into the factory, it'll probably start to leak out there. We see it seemingly every time now, especially with the social media era that we live in currently. So I'm still thinking probably the earliest we would hear about this system is probably to start 2024, and then they spend the rest of that year building up for it and eventually launch in the holiday season. Now, he does continue on here talking about the annual player base as well as even some concepts, I guess, that they're kicking around with this new platform, saying the life cycle of a console is often based on the timing of major game releases and therefore affects our continued commitment to software production. Moreover, we find it essential to continue providing new opportunities for customers to engage with the Nintendo Switch beyond just the launch of new games. We don't believe that a secure number of annual active users negates the need for a next-gen console release. It's very important, basically like, hey, we still feel the need to get a next-gen system out there, even though we have, over 100 million annual users with the current Switch. They say while we're not at a stage to discuss specifics about a potential next-gen console, we're continually considering innovative ideas that could offer new and unique experiences. We're developing a variety of things with that future in mind. In the event of a hardware or a future hardware launch, the annual active user numbers will be heavily impacted by the number of hardware units sold. Knowing this, it's important to maintain a substantial customer base that can enjoy Nintendo's dedicated gaming systems and ensure that we have a smooth transition to the next generation console. Now, he does go on to assure that their primary focus right now is basically taking advantage of the large install base that they have with the Switch through software sales. And I guess we'll hear more about new software in the next couple of months, maybe, although there are rumors that there is no direct in June, so maybe just a couple of Twitter reveals. But the other thing is the smooth transition as well as innovative ideas. Innovative ideas probably concern some people because Nintendo can do some weird things and sometimes trip themselves up, when I feel like if they just had the Switch concept of that hybrid model and made it a bit stronger, small little twist on it. I think if they did a high refresh screen and played it off with some kind of marketing, much like they took advanced haptic feedback and said HD Rumble, that might be something there that they can at least throw up in the media and say, hey, look how cool this extra feature is that technically's been available for a while, but we put that Nintendo twist on it. As for the smooth transition from one generation to the other, tells me probably a longer cross-gen period, and as well as probably backwards compatibility. Like, that's something that's been questioned here and there. Can they pull it off? Well, if they want a smooth transition and to bring as many people as possible with them, you want to let them know that their current library they've accrued with the current Switch will follow them over digitally and physically. So to hear them start to talk more and more about this, I think is very interesting. And again, we're going to hear more and more from investors pressing them a bit. So look out, I would say, starting next month with the annual gathering of the shareholders, and we'll see what they have to say then. Next up, let's talk about some strange stuff going on right now at PlayStation with one of their partner studios, and that's Deviation Games. On Friday, news started to break from employees on LinkedIn that they were just let go And it seemed like it was really adding up very quickly as more and more profiles were updated that they were no longer working at Deviation Games. And VGC did confirm this a bit from their own sources, which we can see over on their site, where they say PlayStation-backed studio Deviation Games has been hit with layoffs, with sources telling VGC as many as 90 members of staff may have been affected. And I feel like last checked with the headcount is a little over 140 people. So they lost like 60 or 70%, so like a high number of the total workforce at Deviation Games. And it seems like this was sort of out of nowhere when you look through some of the profiles and LinkedIn updates from people. Like, they were not expecting this to happen. So what I would expect, that's happened here, I should say, what I would assume, because we have no official confirmation from Sony or Deviation Games, I would assume that Sony has been making the rounds and trying to figure out what they're going to keep and what they're going to cut. We talked about Pixel Opus, how they were just basically shut down. Well, they're going to be shut down here in about a month or so. And we also heard that there was some other game, sci-fi game, that was canceled by Sony. This also confirmed through LinkedIn posts and other things. People were wondering if Deviation Games was in some way attached to that, because you would lay off 90 people, again, 60 to 70% of your workforce out of nowhere, if a large-scale project that you're working on was canceled. And considering their highest profile partnership that was really put out there was Sony, that was about 2 years ago, kind of fit together that Sony showed up, didn't like what they were seeing, or there's been a continuous miss of different milestones. They decided, you know what, we're not funding this anymore, go and shut it down. And if this is the case, and we'll say whatever game that Sony was contracting them to make has been canceled, it'd be a shame, because one, I'd be really curious to see what they would have come up with, since the talent behind it was from Call of Duty and Respawn. So they've worked on Titanfall and other types of games, and it was kind of going towards, I guess, a first-person military sci-fi shooter, and at least them creating their own studio and maybe having a bit more creative freedom could have given us something really cool. But then Sony sees it, and Sony has a certain bar of quality that they are trying to hit with a lot of their releases, and to me, it seems like Sony does not want to come out with a game that's necessarily in the 70s or basically like Redfall. They don't want that, so they'd rather cancel it and even seemingly almost shut down Deviation Games. At least, again, that's what appears from the outside, rather than have that game see the light of day. Some were wondering if this is them shedding, I guess, employees so that they can be acquired and it's easier to acquire them. I don't know why they would do that at all. It seems like a weird strategy when Sony is right now in the market for talent overall. So to me, this just looks pretty straightforward. Sony didn't like what they saw, canceled whatever the project was, and now Deviation Games is left having to lay people off just to remain at least somewhat open. Next up, let's talk about our first indication of sales for The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom. And after seeing midnight releases get revived seemingly because of this title, it's not too shocking to hear that it's doing really well. And our first indication for sales comes out of the UK. We can see Christopher Dring over here on Twitter, who says in the UK, and after just 2 days, The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom is already the 8th biggest Zelda game of all time. So just like total cumulative sales, it's already outsold Skyward Sword, Wind Waker, and A Link Between Worlds. Now, this is based on physical over-the-counter box sales, nothing with digital. It says it is comfortably the biggest box game release of the year, with sales almost a third bigger than Hogwarts Legacy. It's likely Hogwarts had a bigger digital launch than Zelda, but we won't know as Nintendo doesn't share digital data. It's not quite the biggest Switch release ever, as it was slightly below what Scarlet and Violet managed this year. The launch is 173% bigger than Breath of the Wild, which I would expect that, even though this is just one region with the UK. There are so many Switch systems out there compared to when Breath of the Wild came out. Clearly, it released next to the Switch. But here's something interesting when it comes to the revenue side. Tears of the Kingdom is already the 4th biggest Zelda game of all time, just a bit behind Ocarina of Time and Twilight Princess. And it appears if you go off of revenue, Tears of the Kingdom actually beat out Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, which is massive, obviously, because we see those sales figures. And as I figured, this would become the fastest selling Zelda game of its launch, like ever. And I think it is going to be doing that. Again, we need more sales information. Nintendo could even just drop a press release sometime this week after they start getting back some of the information themselves and can put out a number of some kind. Even if it's like, hey, we already did 10 million in the first week. Yeah, something tells me that's worth putting a press release out about it. And you know, at this point, just based on the initial velocity of sales, it wouldn't shock me if it did eventually outsell The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild and go on to be the best-selling Zelda game, if nothing else, because I feel like this game, with upgraded hardware, yes, could end up having another resurgence when their next platform release is provided, backwards compatibility, and even some sort of patch to take advantage of that better hardware, because this is a game that is absolutely pushing the Switch to its limits. I mean, the little Switch is struggling, I will say that, but the game itself is massive in scope and ideas, so this is a game that will probably be sold for the next 7 or 8 years, and if nothing else, just through time, will probably eventually top Breath of the Wild. And in our last bit of news, let's talk about Square Enix, as they did release their own financial report from this previous fiscal year, and they had some interesting things going on in here. First off, we can see this is their entire financial sheet that they released. At the bottom of it, though, is where we're going to really talk about some stuff that they're going over, which does include NFTs, blockchain technology. About 30 to 40% of this entire report seems to mention that as their future initiatives. But when it comes down to the numbers, they did have a decrease of about 6% from the previous year in terms of profit. They had a 3% fall, and for digital revenue, 12% down. In fact, even Final Fantasy XIV was down about 12 to 14% or so. They do say it's because they didn't have some sort of premium expansion, which that makes sense if you're going up against a year where it did have one, and they're just kind of coasting with the overall revenue that they're taking in from those subscription fees. But starting on page 24 of their financial outlook, they start to talk heavily about blockchain technology, even talking about some of their investments with quite a few, including the Sandbox, and it really looks like they're going to make a push for this whole blockchain thing where they're going to release more games like Symbiogenesis. That's the big one they wanted to talk about here. Million Arthur, and issuing NFTs, and you're going to hear more and more of that, I think, about, or at least from Square Enix. Now, the positive side for people who are, want to just play games like Final Fantasy or something, they are going to be doubling down on the bigger titles, and by kind of shedding some of what they looked at as kind of dead weight for the Western branch, which, hey, Crystal Dynamics, very talented. I'm sure they're going to do good thing or big things with Tomb Raider and Perfect Dark, but they didn't fit in with what Square was doing. Clearly, they could produce a Tomb Raider game that sold over 10 million copies, and Square would look at them and be like, that's well below expectations. But from here, Square mostly wants to work on seemingly blockchain technology and make sure they get high quality big titles out there, which they have some coming up. Final Fantasy XVI is right around the corner. Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, Kingdom Hearts 4. They tripped and stumbled a bit with some of their more recent releases. Forspoken really comes to mind. But still, I do think Square can work to turn things around a bit here from really being down 6 to 10% overall from the last financial year going into this one. But keep an eye on them with all this blockchain and NFT stuff, because I think eventually you're going to get to a point where Square is like half gaming, like we know them now, and half NFTs and blockchain. And before we go to the comment of the day, we're going to take a look at the poll that I posted up yesterday, where I ask, do you spend more time playing single player or multiplayer games? 85% say single player, 15% multiplayer. Interesting. Okay. See, multiplayer games, you can basically play one for the entire year, and there are a lot of people who do just that. I know there are many people who only buy like 2 or 3 games at the most, and one of them is Call of Duty, one of them is Madden or FIFA, and they're content the entire year because of the multiplayer aspects, and that's something that Sony and Microsoft and even Nintendo clearly recognize, which is interesting that Sony would go out and cancel, seemingly anyway, this Deviation Games title, unless it was in such bad shape and they were in disarray. And I know one of their leads did leave last June, so about a year ago, and maybe that had an effect on really the direction of the studio and the game they were producing. But right now, I would say more than ever, Sony needs to be producing high quality multiplayer games. And I'm hoping that their rumored upcoming showcase has at least a handful of those to show us. And we'll finish up with the comment of the day, as you're seeing here. This is from Ian, who says, looking at that review chart and realizing we have Breath of the Wild and Mario Odyssey in the same year. We were spoiled for sure. Yeah, 2017 was a pretty good year for the Switch, right? I mean, the two tentpole titles, sure, but there was a lot of other stuff there, and the best-selling game on the Switch released just a month after it came out with Mario Kart 8 Deluxe. But that's the biggest takeaway from what Furukawa was saying. They want to have some big-time software releases ready to go for their next platform, which is the most exciting part. Sure, new hardware, it's great, but also looking forward to some big tentpole releases like a Breath of the Wild and a Mario Odyssey there alongside of it. That's really exciting to get some big-time games. And to me, the obvious is either a 3D Mario or a new Mario Kart. Either one, I think, will sell tons of whatever their next system ends up being. And ladies and gentlemen, that's going to do it here for Newswave. If you enjoyed this video, guys, hit that like button. If not, hit the dislike. Leave comments down below about everything we talked about here today. Where's Nintendo talking about next gen with some of their investors? How innovative do you want them to get with the next system? And then also, what about PlayStation and Deviation Games laying off a bunch of developers? What do you think's going on there? Thanks, guys, for watching, and I'll see you next time.